Welcome back to Weekends, and I'm with Barry Nussbaum this hour, and I hope you didn't miss that first segment. And if you did, you can always watch it back because you're going to learn that Michelle Obama has officially filed for an exploratory committee for president. A big deal because it seems now that the pendulum for the Democrats is swinging toward desperation status. They can no longer count on Joe Biden being the answer, even though after the 2020 election, and goodness me, Barry, I was looking at some stats again this week, and let me just, this is something else. And whilst we plan these shows to keep every minute counted for, Barry, it just occurred to me, I had to ask you about this. I was looking at the results when they announced Trump's victory in New Hampshire against Nikki Haley, and they came out at 54% counting, and said that he had won that primary event. And at the same time, in my hand, I was holding something from the US election 2020, and it was saying that the Georgia state election was at 94% counted, with Trump 102,000 votes ahead. And still there was no concession or call of defeat for Joe Biden. And of course, we know how that ended up on an official taking. But how is it that Biden gets to go to 94% and no one calls it for Biden, even though he's trailing massively? But in this case, in Trump, in the primary at 54%, and he was only 10% or 11% ahead of Nikki Haley, they called it. It just seems like there's always two sets of rules when it's convenient one way or another, or whether the sting is in.
Well, here's an inside baseball, as we say in the States, bit of data for you, Jason, regarding what happened in New Hampshire. There was a tremendous amount of money that flew into New Hampshire surreptitiously, get this, to get independents, which most of the people in New Hampshire are registered as independents, to vote for Nikki Haley. In other words, these were people that normally vote Democrat. Tremendous amounts of money were donated to the Haley campaign to get her more votes to impinge on the margin of victory that Trump would have had in New Hampshire, but for all those donations. In other words, they know they can't stop Trump. They, the other party, know that eventually Trump is the nominee, but if they can make it close enough, they can throw enough dirt on the campaign to muddy it up, so to speak. That's why, according to my sources, Trump only got 54%. If you take the non-aligned out, the people that would never normally vote in a Republican primary, it was something like 80-20. It was a landslide, not unlike what happened in the caucuses previously. Trump would have destroyed Nikki Haley in an election of just Republicans. They changed the rules. They made it possible to look close. It was not close.
I had a statistic, Barry, from an article that I'd read doing some research on these numbers, because I didn't understand how it was that independents could vote in this particular primary. And there was some statistic that said in the last primary, there was 36% independents, which seems a massive number. But this time around, it was 46%. So almost half of the people voting in the Republican primary were not even Republicans. And when you look that Nikki Haley got 43% of the vote, it seems she didn't really pull anyone out of the Republican support team.
Spot on. That's exactly what happened. If New Hampshire followed rules similar to parties in other states around the country, our country, you would have seen an 80-20, not something within, 11, 12 points. Nikki Haley got virtually no Republican votes. Her votes were independents who normally vote Democrat, and they were enticed with a massive advertising campaign coming from dark money sources to muddy the waters. And that's what happened. And that's why you see this movement within the Republican Party to name Trump the nominee and get it over with.
Yes.
Trump said no. We'll see what happens.
It's so interesting, isn't it, when you look at Nikki Haley hanging in there, and first of all, you consider that she's pushing for a VP, almost as if she's going to infiltrate the White House, so to speak, as the vice president, just for being a pest in the campaign. And then you wonder, with this money coming in, and some of it coming with that name Reid Hoffman, who seemed to have financed the E. Jean Carroll case, And once you just scratch the surface, you start to see the manipulation, and you wonder that Trump can be such a clever man in certain circumstances. But we call it foxing, that he seems to be playing both sides of the fence here to try and expose. It seems that Nikki Haley at this stage is being played by both sides here to expose the globalist / Democrat plan to infiltrate, and they're letting her play along with it as long as possible. But I noticed there was someone, a big name on X yesterday, coming out and put another exposure on Nikki Haley, and apparently reporting that all of a sudden she stopped tweeting on that platform, which she normally tweets every hour or so. So there's something interesting there. So maybe she's in her own tailspin now, realizing that the jig is up. Very, very interesting. Now, before we move on, I was wondering, because we talked about all the elections that are coming up, and the idea of Pierre Poilievre in Canada talking about freedom and restoring common sense, and I've played on my old show a few of his clips. But the Javier Milei story coming out of South America is something else. And we talked, you talked about the lamb chop sideburns, and I talked about the John Belushi look. But I just think it's just a magnificent thing. I want to show you a short clip, and when we return, we're going to move on to the subject of Maui and Lahaina, because if you're not sure, Barry Nussbaum resides in that part of the world, and he has a report, an update for us from Hawaii. But let's take the Milei clip now. It is awe-inspiring.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Today, I'm here to tell you that the Western world is in danger. And it is endangered because those who are supposed to have to defend the values of the West are co-opted by a vision of the world that inexorably leads to socialism and thereby to poverty. Unfortunately, in recent decades, motivated by some well-meaning individuals willing to help others, and others motivated by the wish to belong to a privileged caste, the main leaders of the Western world have abandoned the model of freedom for different versions of what we call collectivism. We're here to tell you that collectivist experiments are never the solution to the problems that afflict the citizens of the world. Rather, they are the root cause. Do believe me, no one better placed than us, Argentines, to testify to these 2 points.
There you go. There's a bit of a taste of Javier Milei.
Good afternoon.
There you go. That clip just playing there in the background. Barry, how much did that impress you, that at last it seems that there is a counter? And this was the point. He got up and stood up in front of the Davos, a bit like Trump did a few years back, and just shoved it in their face. Because the other thing about this was that Milei was criticised after he won the election, because people said that he was on the WEF's leader list. And my point has always been that to get to know the inner circle and how it works, and to understand how it ticks, you've got to infiltrate. You might even go in there and think that you're part of it, and then realise that you're going to reject it. And he's not the only one to reject it, of course, because we've also seen Vivek Ramaswamy was another one to reject it. Tulsi Gabbard was another person to reject it. And she, of course, walked away from the Democrats. This seems to be gathering steam now.
I was so impressed. This man walked into the lion's den,
yes,
and looked the lion in the eyes and basically raised his middle finger to not only the people that were there, but their entire globalist world agenda, and did it with a smile on his face. And I'll tell you something, the people in the room were numb, as if we don't allow opinions that we don't agree with at Davos, right? And this guy walks in and goes, I don't want your agenda. I don't want your social communist agenda. I don't want you to tell me what the climate's going to be. I don't want you to tell me what to eat. I want freedom. And he was magnificent. Big applause.
Yes.
He's my favorite Argentine politician ever.
Ever. The
Not
same.
that there's any good ones, but he's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there was a scene after the election where he was in the crowd and it was absolutely jam-packed. And a young boy looked about 10 and maybe 11 or 12 years old, and he was waving. And Malay caught his eye and waved this little boy, and they carried him up to the stage. And this boy had a tear in his eye. And Malay, wearing that signature leather jacket, embraced the boy. The boy embraced Malay, gave him the biggest cuddle. And you could see with Malay looking at this boy, and he had himself enjoy, smiling like you wouldn't believe. And it was one of those most magnificent scenes in politics. And I hope that it gets recycled and people can get to see that when Argentina improves for the better, and people will realize that they really did dodge a bullet and go the other way and save themselves. Just truly magnificent. Politics is a blood sport, but sometimes something wonderful happens. And let's hope that this swing continues. Now, we've got to get into the business of what's happening in Hawaii, particularly from Lahaina, Maui, after we saw the horrific fires. And people have got so many questions. And a lot of it comes down to, again, this lack of trust in authority, because we don't seem to get answers. And when we do, they always seem to just divert us or obfuscate the reality. We had the story with the roofs and some houses not being burnt down. And of course, it leads to speculation. And why wouldn't it lead to speculation when good people are asking for good reporting and they're not getting it? So, Barry, let's hope that you can bring us an update. What's the latest happening in Lahaina? What don't we know that you know?
I'll run through it as fast as I can. There are now several hundred lawsuits on file. Lawyers are coming in from all over the states, getting their local credentials set up in Hawaii. They're suing HECO, Hawaiian Electric Company, for leaving the power on, which blew the fires up to the moon. They're suing the county of Maui for not setting off the warning whistles that there were fires. They're suing the police department for blocking the roads that were evacuating. They're suing the mayor. Get this, the 2,000 buildings were destroyed, $5.5 billion in damages, and no houses have been rebuilt in 5 months. Everybody's in temporary housing. There are vast areas that you or me as a citizen can't go into, can't take a picture of, can't fly a drone over, can't be in a plane or a helicopter. It's all sealed. Natural disasters aren't sealed off, Jason. If you were in New York after 9/11, you could go to the ground zero. I did. You could walk right up to it, but not in Maui. If you stop on the road next to Lahaina, you'll get a ticket. And if you don't move, you'll get arrested. Why? What are they covering up? That's what people want to know. I'll tell you something. It's going to be a bigger disaster that's coming, because we have a shortage of construction workers here. We have no housing for new construction workers to be brought in. We have a shortage of building materials here, and we've got to rebuild over 2,000 buildings. And on top of that, Lahaina town sits on the water. It's an old whaling town. Beautiful, beautiful old town. It's now rubble. The city, rather, I should say the county, we don't have a city, it's a county here, is changing the zoning laws. You can't rebuild what burned down. So nobody knows what's going to happen. Meanwhile, the hotels are full of refugees that were moved out on fire night and still don't have a place to go. I saw the other day the big announcement. The first house was demolished. It was taken to a new dump site. It's hazardous material. It's wrapped in plastic. It's going to be bundled up and taken off island. Nobody knows where it's going, but it's going to be in big plastic bags, and it's being trucked out on a daily basis. It's going to take several years just to demolish it, and then maybe reconstruction 5 to 10 years out. That is the Maui update, and it ain't pretty.
It's certainly not pretty. When you said that there's been no rebuilding or any sort of activity in 5 months, immediately my first thought was, have they put the Clintons in charge?
Shades of the hurricanes that they went to rescue people, and the Clinton Foundation made billions. It's kind of like that. The money's pouring in.
Yes.
But I know so many people turned down by FEMA, which is our emergency management on a national level, turned down by the Oprah Fund, turned down by the Red Cross. They're applying for all these programs, but very few people are getting money, certainly not on a timely basis. And the ones that are getting money, Jason, still have to pay their mortgages on houses
Yes.
that are dust.
What happens
It's
to the
a
what happens to
disaster.
the insurance in that situation, Barry?
Well,
People
they're
got insurance?
paying, I know some people that have paid out, been paid out. They're told it's going to be 2 to 5 years before they can even start construction. They still have to pay on their mortgage.
Yeah.
So whatever money they got, their nest egg is doing this every month,
Yes.
a little bit
Yes.
at a time.
Yes. Because we all
Think-
know that
think-
construction costs are built in, right? And they're always going up. So in 2 years' time, that money that they have is not worth what it was today. It's the one industry
And
that
they're
seems to be
paying on a
protected.
mortgage
Yes.
that's attached to a home that ain't there anymore, brother.
Mm. This is a shocking scenario. So once again, government that we look for as the so-called savior is letting the people down by just getting in the way, and the red tape builds up and the delays. Can you explain a bit more about this idea of wrapping this up in plastic to dispose of it somewhere? That reeks of the whole 9/11 removal of the buildings that were shipped off to China. Trucks were not allowed to stop. It was very, very secret. One would only assume that they didn't want anyone to look at perhaps thermite that might have been in there if that building was collapsed. Then what would be the reason to do this at this late stage? Is there an inkling, therefore, that they might be able to find something that you're not supposed to find?
That is the exact question everybody on this island wants to know. And mum's the word in response. It's being wrapped in plastic. It's being stored in a temporary site, and it's going to be trucked to a port and taken somewhere, as you said, probably China, to be incinerated. Now, why is it you can't see the dump site? You can't see the removal site. You can't see what's on the trucks. You can't take pictures of the town. You can't even fly a drone over the town. You can't even stop on the highway. There's signs everywhere. You can go to jail for just stopping your car on the highway that's a mile from Lahaina. It makes no sense. So all I have for you are questions. I don't have any answers because nobody knows, at least nobody in the public.
Yeah, this is the big thing. But of course, what's happening at the same time is the general public, all of a sudden, their antenna is on overdrive, and they're starting to realize that they're being played yet again, and not having the questions answered. So this must all play in for people realizing in an election year that the only way that we're going to at least attempt to get answers is to demand political change. And the one man out there, of course, anti-establishment all the way, who, of course, got punished this week yet again in an attempted humiliation in the E. Jean Carroll case, the $83.3 million awarded in that case, which you can almost, it's certain that it's going to go to appeal. I can't even imagine Trump would even want to settle this out, because this plot for the E. Jean Carroll sexual assault in the department store was part of a Law and Order script. I mean, it was word for word verbatim. She forgot what year this was meant to have happened. She claimed she was wearing a dress that hadn't been created yet in the catalogs. There's just so many poor situations here. You wonder if push comes to shove, Trump does want a brand new Department of Justice and an independent Attorney General. I mean, it's staring us in the face, isn't it?
Well, it's not only that, but I read that this is about the 8th man that she's accused of rape. Rape is a very serious, violent crime, and she's a serial accuser of famous, wealthy, established men. This one, she got in front of a jury that happened to hate Trump with a DA that hated Trump, and she got a conviction. It's really interesting, Jason. Guess how many of the previous rape accusations that she had claimed about were allowed to be introduced to the jury? Any idea how many the jury heard about?
Well, if they were guilty, then you would assume all, and if they weren't, if they were all dismissed, you'd assume none.
0. In other words, the jury never heard she does this every 6 months.
Oh,
For years.
Yeah.
For years. She's a serial accuser of rape of famous, wealthy men, and her lawyers got the judge to agree that Trump's lawyers in his defense could not introduce that to impeach her credibility. that would have gotten the case thrown out.
Almost immediately. You can imagine no jury wants to be taken for a ride, no juror, and certainly no jury, and it perverts the course of justice there, and we're seeing that happen in real time. You know, Barry, I made the observation yesterday that this case is so preposterous, one wonders, given that there is so many allegations of real sexual misconduct that are covered up, that perhaps this case is going to be used by those people to make it as if no one will believe a woman ever again in a criminal or a civil case, for that matter, because it comes down to money, that of course they'll all be laughed out of the courtroom, and then they'll just say, no, we're not doing this anymore. It feels like there's another agenda behind the agenda, not just to get Trump, because at the end of the day, I mean, it's a punishment and it's a penalty, and if he pays it, there's no other thing. It's a bit of money. Who knows? He gets to be president next year. Goodness me, he can print money for everyone if he wants to at that stage. It doesn't become the big deal, but it seems like there's something else coming, and we've seen the allegations of sexual misconduct, and we're going to talk about that after the break, because we've got another one out of all places coming out of Iran, in a country where homosexuality is punished, and all of a sudden two mullahs caught up on video in a homosexual case along with a politician. It just doesn't get any crazier than that. We'll be back with more here on Weekends with me on TNT Radio.